When I was growing up in the holy city of Cincinnati, I lived next door. I lived next door to the people named the Buttreys. The Buttreys were our neighbors, and they were really, really good people, even if they came from Kentucky, and they had a bit of more of a southern accent than we did. But we really liked the Buttreys. I don't tell my wife this, but I think Mindy Buttrey was probably my first girlfriend at age 5. Now, next to the Buttreys were the Vetters. Now, the Vetters, they were Catholics. We didn't quite know what to do with that. And they had lots of kids everywhere. And frankly, they weren't always the cleanest or the most socially appropriate. But still, they were our neighbors. Now, next to them, down the road, just a little further on West McKelvey in Cincinnati, were the Armors. They weren't Catholic, but I don't know if they even went to church. I didn't know what to do with them. They were okay, even though they drank and smoked too much, and their son, Stevie, tried to beat me up on several occasions. But still, they were our neighbors. When I was 8, we moved to a fancier neighborhood. Now the houses were more expensive there and nicer. Next to us then were the Hamples. They were Catholic too, and they too, like everybody else in that neighborhood, had a boatload of kids. Kevin, one of those kids, liked to terrorize me. I was a bit of a wimp, and he liked to take advantage of kids like me. But nonetheless, the Hamples, they were our neighbors, as were the Perrys, who lived on the other side of our house. The Perrys were weird. They were really weird. They voted for a different political party than did my family. I don't think we knew anybody who voted for a different political party than we did. And Mr. Perry, who was really quite odd, when he wanted his kids to come home, would play his trombone outside to gather them. Dum 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 dum, and then the kids were supposed to come back. Mr. Perry was odd, but still, the Perrys, they were our neighbors. You see, the neighbors are the folks who live next to you, right? The Greek word for neighbor, plesion, means one who is near. The Buttreys, the Vetters, the Armors, the Hamples, and the Perrys, they were near. They were our neighbors. They made up the neighborhood. It's pretty simple, right? And when you hear the Old Testament injunction to love your neighbor as yourself, you have a clear vision of what that looks like. Even though it's hard and even though the neighbors are a little odd, you know what it means to love the neighbor. They are the people who are right under your nose, who need your love and your care, who need your cookies and once in a while your bread, your willingness to mow their lawns and sometimes shovel their snow, and probably listen to their problems. It all makes perfect sense. It's all very rational. We know who the neighbors are. It's all very rational until you meet Jesus, and then it all changes. This one comes into our lives and disrupts our little ordered world. He unsettles the neighborhood. He moves into the neighborhood, and the neighborhood changes big time. Again, the story goes like this. A lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Generally in those days, or biblical days, lawyers were called scribes. They were religious lawyers. But by the time Luke was written, the scribes weren't around. But the lawyers remained. That seems to be the case always. And you know lawyers. They like to get things straight and right and orderly, even if sometimes it's simply for the sake of getting it right, straight, and orderly. We used to be a part of a condo association, and we had lawyers on that board, and they liked everything in very neat fashion, and all the rules followed, and all that kind of stuff. All kind of stuff. For some lawyers, the law is even like a game. Now, I can't say that's true for the lawyer who stands up to ask Jesus a question, but Luke does seem a little cynical about this lawyer since he says that his question is about testing Jesus. Maybe this lawyer just wants to find out how smart Jesus really is. I don't know. We don't know. But the lawyer asked a very good question, in my opinion. He asked this question, "Teacher, what must I do to get life with God?" I can't imagine a better question than that. The question may have to do with the next life as well as this life, although it would be somewhat unusual for a Jewish man of Jesus' day to be overly concerned about what happens after you die. They weren't. Or modern-day Christianity had never gotten this. The Jews were not overly interested in what happened after people died. But by the time Luke was written, folks were starting to be more concerned about life after death. So he's really asking, how do I get life, the real life, the good life, perhaps now and perhaps forever? How do I get that life? Well, Jesus says, what have you learned? What do you know? What do you read? Jesus asked him this very pointed question. Note here the significance of returning to what you already know and have already read. It's not really complicated, which is what Deuteronomy in our first lesson is saying. It's saying you know what to do. It's not that hard. You don't have to climb up to heaven. You don't have to cross over the sea. No, the word is very near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe, which, by the way, points to the significance of learning this stuff in the first place. It's why you go to Sunday school, why you go to church camp, why you go to confirmation. You need something to remember when you need to remember it. So, Mr. Lawyer, Mr. Feiger, Mr. Bernstein, what have you read and learned? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as you would love yourself. It's called the Shema, by the way, at least the first part of it is. It's what good Jews repeated over and over and over again. It's what they learned, it's what they repeated. Love God and love others. Well, you got it, Jesus tells the lawyer. This isn't anything new. You know what to do. Now do it. But the lawyer wanted to get it really right, as lawyers are prone to do, as human beings are prone to do. Well, who's my neighbor then, he asked. Well, Mr. Feiger, Mr. Bernstein, that's obvious. It's the Perrys and the Hamples and the Buttrees. Well, of course that's true, but Jesus ain't satisfied with the obvious. And so he tells a story. He often tells stories. Stories are slippery, by the way. They can have this way of bringing truth to us when we don't even really know it. They can offend us before we realize we've been offended. The story you all know, or most of you do anyway. A man, again, goes from Jerusalem to Jericho, a dangerous road. He gets attacked and is left for dead. A couple of religious guys, a priest and a member of a priestly family, are on the same route, and they see this suffering man, and they just walk by. Now, I have to tell you, probably the original hearers of the story liked the story at this point. Yeah. Yes, religious guys in those days were probably held in high esteem, but like us, the ancients probably appreciated when you could poke fun at them. They liked it when the muckety-mucks fell into the muck. And don't tell me, and maybe I just am talking to myself here, all right, but don't tell me you haven't smirked a bit when Joel Osteen or Jimmy Swaggart have fallen off their pedestals. I mean, you kind of enjoy that. You like to make fun of folks in charge. You know, those politicians and those haughty rich people. The ancients like to make fun of them too. So the issue with the story, the offending part of the story, isn't the part about the religious guys. The offending part comes at the end of the story. And those who would have listened or were listening would have anticipated the ending, as we often anticipate the ending. They would say, oh, we know how it's going to end. An ordinary Jewish man like one of us, not one of those haughty, rich politicians, is going to come by and help the dying man out, right? No. Sorry, average Joe, ordinary Sarah. You are not the hero of the story. Guess who really is the hero? And this, you have to understand, or you don't get this story at all, is very offensive. The hero is a Samaritan. We hate the Samaritans. We hate them. We've never liked them. Now, frankly, we're not always sure why, but we know that they are our people's enemy. They are a bunch of half-breeds. The story that we remember and we keep telling is that the Assyrians, when they invaded the northern part of our land, ended up marrying some of our women. They messed with our purity schemes. We never liked that. And besides, they don't have the same religion that we do. I mean, it's a little bit like ours, but they don't worship where they're supposed to worship, in Jerusalem. Those Samaritans, there are nothing but problems. Before you know it, Jesus has offended us. It's as if he's talking to a group of Americans during the Vietnam War and makes the hero a member of the Viet Cong. It's as if he's talking to us right now and makes the hero a Russian. What? No way. You got to get this. In Jesus, it's a whole new neighborhood. In Jesus, as Dominic Crossan says, the structure of expectation is turned on its head. In Jesus, the neighborhood is a lot bigger and a lot messier than we ever thought. In Jesus, the neighbors are not just the Buttreys or the Hamples. The neighbors are the ones who are in need, and the neighbors are the ones who show mercy. The neighbors are also our enemies. I want you to think on these things. Reflect on these things as you think and talk about immigrants and refugees and people who don't look like you and people who don't think like you and people who don't vote like you and people who don't speak your language and people who don't have the same color of skin as you and people who don't have the same sexual orientation as you, people who even hate you. I want you to think about Jesus and the Samaritan. It is a lot bigger neighborhood than you ever anticipated. With Jesus, you got to be surprised or prepared for one surprise after another. In many ways, what we Christians say is that what we say about Jesus, we're saying about God. In God, all bets are off. In God, the world expands, not collapses in on itself. In God, the God of Jesus, walls and fences are torn down, not put up. In God, peace, not violence, rules. In God, weapons are not taken up, but put down. In God, the God of Jesus, what runs the show is love. And true love always expands. As I said on Facebook this past week, in true love, scarcity does not reign, but abundance does. And I hope you noted the abundant way the Samaritan takes care of the hurting Jewish man on the road. He goes over the top in tending to the needs of the hurting man. There is abundance in God. There is, as the old hymn says, a wideness in God's mercy. And by the way, you know that. You've been taught that. Now live it. Go and do likewise. Amen.